Executive Diploma from Harvard University, MBA from George Washington University, and Mathematics degree from St. Stephen's College in Delhi of India. Ladies and gentlemen, as I invite my distinguished panelists on the dais to get things set here. I still can see people pouring in. We request all of you to kindly find your seats as quickly as possible. Kindly accept to the distinguished members, to all of you, kindly accept a warm welcome one more time. Feeling really glad and spirited to steer you to the penultimate engagement under this umbrella of the summit, ladies and gentlemen. And pleased to have been graced by our distinguished dignitaries and prominent investors here and the members in the audience. This is a panel that is, again, I say, penultimate panel connecting to the closing ceremony and themed at leveraging PPP and infrastructure and services. So we're discussing a very fashionable topic, why Nepal has come a long, long way from the classic approach of PPP and is now carrying it as a tool for socioeconomic development, the much needed socioeconomic development. Now, with this intense need of development, especially related to infrastructure, the resources, prospects that we have, the aspirations of the young population, and the shrinking global landscape that allows for heightened interaction, mobility of knowledge in all sorts, PPP stands as a promising tool to spearhead this founding sector of overall development. So we cannot be more happy as we look forward to this very fundamental issue that we'll be discussing herein. To set the tone and direction for the rest of the expert deliberation here, may I now invite to the podium for a presentation that, again, as I said, sets the tone and direction for this deliberation. Okay, before I invite our presentator, may I invite our member in one more member in the distinguished panel, Mr. Dushyant Thakur, Deputy Executive Director, World Association of Investment Promotion Agency. Such a pleasure, sir, to have you join us here. So getting back to our regular schedule, ladies and gentlemen, first a presentation that directs or gives food or lays the tone for the deliberations. Mr. Mark Giblett, Senior Infrastructure Finance Specialist at the World Bank Group. He's a Senior Infrastructure Finance Specialist at the World Bank Group's JPG unit and has 25 plus years of structured finance experience in infrastructure and project finance. He advises governments on enhancing legal and regulatory frameworks for private sector investment in infrastructure. He holds a BA in economics from the University of Exeter and an MBA in international business from the University of British Columbia. My pleasure and privilege, ladies and gentlemen, to invite to the podium our presenter, Mr. Mark Giblett.
On, shouldn't I? There we go. Good afternoon, everybody. As kindly introduced, my name is Mark Giblett, and I'm a Senior Infrastructure Finance Specialist at the World Bank, and it gives me great pleasure to be here today to be part of this important session on PPPs. So I've been asked by the organisers to basically set the context for the panel discussion on PPPs, but I've only been given 10 minutes. And for those who know me, it usually takes 10 minutes to me to introduce myself. But, you know, based on the sessions we had yesterday, it seems like time is a bit of an elastic concept at this summit. So maybe 10 minutes actually means 20 minutes. But don't worry, MC, I'm going to try and keep these slides to 10 minutes. So I first of all really want to set the macroeconomic context, because obviously the economic context is very important from a private sector investor's perspective, whether it's domestic investors or it's overseas investors. So the good news is that essentially Nepal is slowly beginning to improve its economy post-COVID. Economic growth is expected to rebound to around about 3.3% in FY24 from 1.9% in FY23. And this is mainly being due on the back of an increase in services, particularly tourism, so that's accommodation and food, and also an increase in industrial output, which is essentially higher hydropower generation. And moving forward to 25-26, I think the consensus is that basically growth is going to average around about 5%. In terms of the half-year current account balance, you will note that it's actually moved from a negative 0.7% in H1 FY23 to a surplus of 2.7% in H1 FY24. So this is the first time that Nepal has benefited from a surplus in 8 years. And this has mostly been driven by remittances, that's money coming in from overseas workers, and the narrowing of the trade deficit. Over the same period, the fiscal deficit has fallen from 1.4% to 0.4%, and this has been mainly due to a reduction in government spending, and inflation has come down from well over 8% to around about 6.5%. But inflation is proving a little bit sticky at the moment in terms of coming down further. There's been quite a significant decline in poverty. This was mentioned yesterday, from 25% in 2011 to around about 3.6% in FY23, and that's mostly been driven by migration and remittances, and of course those two are to some extent linked. Inequality, defined by the Gini index, has continued its downward trajectory, and in the banking sector is still fairly profitable and fairly stable, but non-performing loans are actually beginning to creep up in the commercial banking side, so obviously that needs to be monitored carefully moving forwards. In terms of the public debt position, Nepal is actually doing quite well relative to many of its peers. Public debt to GDP is just under 40%, and you can see from the chart below that essentially there was a sharp increase from FY20 to FY21, and of course that was mainly due to COVID, but essentially public debt remains fairly sustainable. And this is basically due to the fact that a large chunk of this debt is essentially being lent on concessional terms, so it means long tenors at relatively low interest rates, and successive governments have actually been fairly prudent in terms of fiscal management. Unfortunately, Nepal, like a lot of other countries, are going to be facing some headwinds, so there are some downward risks to this relatively rosy economic scenario. So obviously increasing geopolitical uncertainties could cause an upsurge in commodity prices, and this is obviously going to affect the Nepalese economy through an increase in import prices. There could be a slowdown in growth in partner countries, so this could affect remittances and tourist revenues, and that's quite important because basically remittances and tourism have been the two main engines or drivers of economic growth over the last few years. Persistent inflation expectations could dampen consumer demand, so this essentially means that individuals don't believe prices are coming down, so demand higher wages, which keeps prices up. And of course, unfortunately, as you all know, Nepal is very exposed to climate change and natural disasters, so there could be some shocks coming from that angle. And finally, frequent political changes and uncertainties in terms of policies, are not friends to FDI and private sector investment. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a context of where the economy is now, but where does Nepal have aspirations to grow to? What are its objectives? Well, first of all, we heard this yesterday, that essentially by 2030, Nepal wants to become a middle-income country and wants to achieve the SDGs. By 2043, it wants to become a high-income status, and essentially by 2045, it wants to basically get net zero emissions in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. But of course, to do that, it's going to require a lot of investment into infrastructure, and estimates vary from institution to institution, but I think the general consensus is that at least 10% per year of GDP has really got to be put into investment from 2020 through to 2030 in order to meet those 2030 objectives. But at the moment it seems that infrastructure investment as a percentage of GDP is averaging around about 4%. So of course there's a bit of a gap at the moment. So how is Nepal approaching its economic development plan to try and reflect the importance of infrastructure investment? Well, it's centering its infrastructure development plans around the GRID framework. And for those who are not familiar with GRID, I'm sure you are by now, but GRID stands for Green, Resilient and Inclusive Development. And some of you may recall back in 2021, Nepal was the first country to publicly announce that it was going to basically tie its growth strategy to this GRID framework. That was in the so-called Kathmandu Declaration. So as a result of this, basically the government and various development partners have coalesced around this GRID framework and are trying to bring investment into various GRID-related sectors. And I've listed some of them down there. We have renewable energy, sustainable tourism, green transport and resilient roads, and integrated solid waste management, to name a few. But money coming in from the development partners and money coming in from the government alone is going to be insufficient, essentially, to meet the infrastructure investment needs in these sectors. So Nepal has got to start mobilizing more money from the private sector, particularly through PPPs. And the government itself has recognized this, the importance of PPPs, in the 15th Development Plan. And of course, the 16th Development Plan is going to be released, I understand, in the summer. So this is really based on the 15th Development Plan. But in that plan, the government forecast or estimated they needed to mobilize around about $6 billion of money from PPPs into infrastructure over the 5-year life of the plan, which essentially goes from 2019 through to 2024. But as you'll see from this slide and the charts here, Nepal hasn't been too successful in trying to meet those targets. So this data is taken from the PPI database. PPI stands for Private Participation Infrastructure. It is a database that's managed by the World Bank. It's publicly accessible, so you just put PPI database into your search engine and you can get access to that data. And it essentially tracks private sector investment into infrastructure in emerging market and developing economies. So this data is from Nepal. It's from 2013 through to 2023, first half, so essentially 10 years. So based on the reported data in the PPI database, you can see that there are basically 26 projects mobilizing about $3.5 billion of capital. So that's actually quite a considerable sum of money. But that's $3.5 billion over 10 years compared with the $6 billion that Nepal is trying to target over 5 years of the 15th plan. But I think the most important fact to draw from this chart is that by far the greatest majority of investment has really gone into the electricity sector, which is really the hydro sector, with 24 out of 26 projects. So essentially that means that Nepal hasn't been too successful in trying to mobilize private sector investment through PPPs into other sectors. So why has that been the case? Well, I put some issues down here. These are not in order of any importance. But first of all, Nepal generally lacks the financial resources to invest the amount of money it needs into infrastructure. This is both from the public spending side, but also from the PPP side. So Nepal doesn't really have sufficient funding to prepare feasibility studies, to provide viability gap funding, to provide linking infrastructure if that's required, and also availability payments if that's the chosen contractual structure for the PPP. Like many other countries that are starting doing PPPs, there is a lack of understanding and willingness to do PPPs. PPPs are regarded as complex, time-consuming, and also, many ministries and agencies have spent decades procuring infrastructure through traditional procurement, and human nature being what it is, people tend to lean towards what they're used to, not new things such as PPPs. There is weak legal and policy arrangements for PPPs, lack of policy stability in some cases. There's delays in approval processes, particularly in terms of land. There's sometimes a lack of coordination between the stakeholders. And of course, from offshore investors, there's FX risk in terms of depreciation. And in terms of contractual structures, there are some issues around the sharing of costs, benefits and risks. And I agree with all of these constraints, and these are issues that need to be addressed. But you'll be interested to hear that it wasn't me that came up with these list of issues. These were actually extracted from the 15th Development Plan prepared by the government itself. So the good news is that the government actually recognises itself what the issues are. And of course that's important because you can't deal with the issues unless you know what the issues are. So coming to my last slide, the MC will be very pleased to hear, what initiatives have been taken by the government to try and address some of these issues? Well, first of all, in 2019, you had the PPP and Investment Act that was passed, and that was essentially passed to try and set the legal framework for PPPs and FDI. And we heard from the Honourable CEO of IBN yesterday that the President has approved an amendment to that Act. In 2022, IBN, which is essentially the nodal agency for PPPs in Nepal, prepared the Project Bank guidelines. That was with the help of the World Bank and various other development partners. And I think you got a copy of the Project Bank guidelines in your goodie bag. So essentially, these guidelines set a very robust framework for implementing agencies to identify and screen PPP projects. And of course, there's been lots of capacity building from various development partners, not just the World Bank, including the CLDP. So we have capacity building at the IBN level, ministries and agencies at the federal and provincial level. So this is all around project identification, project screening, climate risk screening, fiscal risk management, and project management. So finally, if you just look at the chart on the right of the slide, this has been extracted from the Benchmarking Infrastructure Development Report that was issued by the World Bank very recently. And as the name suggests, it focuses very much on the benchmarking of infrastructure across countries, focusing on PPPs. So essentially it looks at how robust a country's institutional, legal and regulatory framework is for doing PPPs. And it does this benchmarking across 4 parameters: project preparation, project procurement, contract management, and how well a government handles unsolicited proposals. So you can see Nepal's scores in the middle, and the scores are reflected in the blue band around the outside, and the global average is in the green band, the thinner green band around the outside of the circle. So you can see essentially Nepal is not doing too badly. It is performing there or thereabouts in terms of the global averages, but of course much more can be done in terms of strengthening the enabling environment for PPPs. Much more can be done to improve capacity building at the federal and provincial level, but much more importantly, more can be done to try and mobilize private sector investment through PPPs into sectors outside of the electricity sector. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. Hopefully I've kept within the 10 minutes, and I'm sure some of these issues and questions I've raised will be dealt with by the panel. So with that, let me hand back to the MC. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for setting the tone for the deliberations just right. I really request you to join us in the panel. Said that, I turn to the session moderator. We have around less than 60 minutes for the deliberation, and that includes the statements from the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister, because this is connecting to the closing ceremony wherein we are expecting some high dignitaries. So without further ado, my pleasure to hand it over to the session moderator. Thank you.
It's not working. Thank you very much, Ms. Sovna. Namaste and good afternoon, Honorable Deputy Prime Minister and Home Minister Lamichhane, Honorable Secretary Phanindra Gautam, Ministry of Law, Justice and Parliamentary Affairs, Chief Executive Officer Sushil Bhatta of the Office of the Investment Board of Nepal. So thank you so much to you all for being here today. Just a reminder before we get started on the panel discussion. It turns out that you can actually hear quite a little bit from the audience if the audience is speaking or making certain noises, and it turns out that the speakers are turned more towards you all than it is towards the stage, so it may be difficult to hear. So I just ask that if you need to speak with your neighbor or take a phone call, that you please do so outside. So thank you very much. So it's been very encouraging to hear about the government of Nepal's commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as graduating to middle-income country status fairly soon. Investing in critical infrastructure is going to be necessary to achieve these goals, as Mark just discussed. However, in Nepal and in most countries all around the world, it's almost impossible to do just with the public sector. And so encouraging private sector engagement and investment is absolutely critical. Mark also discussed that a bit. So that's where PPPs come into the picture. So with that, I'd like to direct my first question to CEO Bhatta. The government of Nepal, and specifically the Office of the Investment Board of Nepal, has worked tirelessly to design a public-private partnership policy framework to draw foreign investors. Could you please discuss some elements and characteristics of Nepal's framework that may be attractive to foreign investors? And what does Nepal's framework specifically have to offer to investors?
Thank you, Grishmaji, for the question. In retrospect to the policy framework that Nepal has for PPP, well, we are guided by Public-Private Partnership and Investment Act 2019. But prior to that, we started the very business with the act that was promulgated long back in 2011, Investment Board Act. And how we evaluated is we formulated PPP policy in 2015, and which is now under review, and then we'll go for revision also. But as far as the existing provision that the PPP-IA Act has given, we basically, it's all about risk and return, as rightly said by Mark, and also about managing risk. So on that retrospect, management of risk is most important. The spirit when you carry along with the Act is management of risk, and then subsequently is to the extent possible, the de-risking has to be done. And as per the Act, the PPP project can be developed only upon allocation of risk that we offload to the private sector. So we are on traditional and conventional mode of PPP that we are exercising, but we can, through this summit, position that we have been successful exercising that model, where government comes forward and takes obligations of managing land, issue relating to land acquisitions, and at the same time giving statutory clearances of tree cutting or maybe lease arrangements of government land or private land acquisition. We do facilitation. But we are at the same time well aware of how important it is for us to undertake the obligations that we have undertaken. That needs to be fulfilled from our side, because that otherwise eventually would lead to eventually delays of the project. So it is very important for project to be accomplished within or before stipulated timeline, because there is matter pertaining to benefit sharing also there. So there are benefits that the government gets, direct benefits and indirect benefits also. The project coming into logical conclusion will generate one sort of vibrancy because we get forward linkage benefits. But during construction regime, it creates a lot of things, construction materials, consumption, creation of decent job, employment opportunities and all that. So beside to name, in order to ensure that projects are commercially viable, it is high time, because Mark's presentation, if you refer to incentivize climate actions or even green projects, the grid needs to be operationalized as early as possible. And international financing institution can play a very instrumental role in bridging the infrastructure gap in developing countries through taking best leverage of finance through managing and developing PPPs. And also under this Act, there are a lot of other things that instruments will have to introduce. For example, even for hedging, I think it is high time for us to, at our end, also determine and prioritize 1, 2, 3, which project we are coming up front and ensuring the proponent or developer company of those risks, if can be mitigated to the extent possible. And at the same time, talking about the facilitation of the project, we have been doing our best, because for us, we want to complete those huge critical infrastructure projects, reach out to the market, and most likely you would see investment board in future would go to the market and say, hey, this is our demonstration project. This is the project where we have demonstrated our effective hand-holding, fast-tracking services. So in that retrospect, we have been duly coordinating with all relevant line agencies, and whole as a government, we have been treating ourselves as one-stop. So matters which are under the jurisdiction of the Office of the Investment Board has been very well fast-tracked, and at the same time, we have developed some simple management tool. We say in order to ensure we have effective coordination mechanism, because we do tag along with the implementation schedule of the developer, and tagging along with that implementation schedule, we have our coordination work plan. So it is well defined which agency has to do what, by when, how, and why. So this much for now.
Thank you very much. It's really helpful to hear that the government of Nepal has taken such a thoughtful approach to risk and boosting investor confidence. My next question, speaking of the PPPIA, is to Mr. Secretary Gautam. The Public-Private Partnership and Investment Act of 2019, along with its regulations, established the Investment Board of Nepal as a fast-track agency to execute PPP projects. To further strengthen the board and streamline its processes, the government recently passed an ordinance related to this act. What are the key provisions that were amended or added to the ordinance, and how do you think it could positively impact the outlook of PPPs in Nepal?
Thank you for the question. Respected Chair, respected members of the panel, respected delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the ordinance issued by the government just yesterday provides for institutional strengthening of the Investment Board Nepal. In the past, it has to go through the office of Prime Ministers. Now the ordinance has created ample space for it to directly go to implementation, monitoring and evaluation, coordination, facilitation and other things. Second thing is, there was a dire need to have a permanent secretariat in the IBN. Now the ordinance provides for secretariat with permanent staffs, which is composed of relevant experts of the different sectors. So these are the key provisions the ordinance has brought. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also sounds like a way to elevate the outlook for PPPs here in Nepal. So my next question is to Dr. Bana. Your recent works have included comparisons of PPP legal frameworks in the region. How does Nepal compare to others that you have studied in South Asia?
Thank you, Grishma ji. Honorable Chair of the session and all of us who are assembled here. As far as PPP laws in the regions are concerned, we have quite a spread. And depending on because here we are dealing with public assets, and every government is obliged to not only take care of the interests of the investor, but more so for the public. And accordingly, as per their needs and priorities, the laws have been framed. So, as we look at the map, I'll go in a clockwise manner. And first is Kingdom of Bhutan, Royal Kingdom of Bhutan. They enacted the law in 2017, and doesn't mean that they were not having the PPP projects before. In fact, one of the most successful hydropower project is Dagachu hydropower project in Bhutan, which was proposed through ADB after the Kyoto Protocol and has been a success story. Then we have Myanmar, who also enacted their law started in 2015 and finalized 2017, but due to the problems in the country, not much is being done there. And then when we look at Bangladesh, yes, that's another success story. Their law has come in 2017, and you would be happy to note that in 2020, World Bank reported that Bangladesh was one of the maximum recipients of infrastructure funds from outside the country. And the PPP law must be having some role to play in that. Then we have Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka does not have any specified PPP law. They have their tender process part 2, which is nothing but they have modified their tender process to suit the external investment in infrastructure projects. And accordingly, they are dealing the PPP projects through their existing rules and regulations and arbitration provisions. Then we have Maldives, small country, and as per their priorities, they enacted Special Economic Zone Act 2014, and then to further take care of their requirements, in 2019 they came up with Unsolicited Proposals Act. As far as rules are concerned, they are taking care through their existing legal framework, all the rules, the regulatory part, and also the arbitration if there are any disputes. Then we have Pakistan. They also enacted their law in 2017, and there are specific rules for the PPP with regulators and arbitration procedures. Afghanistan also enacted in 2017, but it is hardly being used. As far as India is concerned, a lot of PPP activity, but there is no specific PPP Act. In 2005, Cabinet Committee approved certain procedures, rules to be put under Niti Aayog, and at the central level and state level, there are structures which handle the PPP projects through the model concession agreements and various policies. There are regulators and there are standard arbitration procedures. And one of the largest activity that's happening in the region is because it's a large economy as well. Coming back to Nepal, the 2015 PPP policy has just been reviewed for maybe for applying it to subnational, provincial and municipal level. But the Act of 2019 is quite comprehensive, and as the previous panelists had mentioned, in 2022 they have taken care of many things, the gaps which are there, and today, as I see it, it is well equipped to handle any PPP investment in any sector in Nepal, and maybe like I mentioned about Bangladesh, Nepal will be the next to receive one of the largest foreign investment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bana. So we know that having a legal framework in place is a very important first step. However, operationalizing may be a different story. So to Mr. Hayek, can you describe some challenges in the practical application of PPP frameworks, and how can countries like Nepal ensure that its PPP framework is properly implemented?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, very good. Okay. So maybe you start from the top and say that, as you've heard, there needs to be a well-defined policy for PPP. Politically, what is the government willing to do in terms of involving the private sector or not? And it seems that Nepal has enacted this policy, and it is based largely on the Sustainable Development Goals, which is fantastic. So you are doing very, very well. After that, you need to establish a strategy, and the strategy is basically how we are going to do this thing. And that requires legislation, that requires setting up the organs of government that are going to deal with it, and you've done that. You have legislation, it is being reviewed periodically, it is being dynamically improved. You have decided that the OIBN is the entity that is going to take care of this, so you're doing great. Then it comes to making sure that these people that are going to implement that policy and that strategy are qualified. And it is, believe me, not easy to be a qualified public sector PPP professional. I've been there, I know what I'm talking about. Because you need to be able to deal with politicians and members of parliament and prime minister and ministers, and every ministry has its own priorities. And you need to be able to deal with consultants for projects. You need to be able to understand legal issues that are in the contracts. You need to understand financial issues, understand financial modeling. You need to be able to have a big picture of the pipeline of projects, how you're going to prioritize the projects that you're going to implement. You need to know how to deal with investors, local investors, external investors, different requirements. So it is really very, very difficult to be in that position. And I'm very happy that under the leadership of Sushil Bhatta, you have been able to do that. The IBN today, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, is very well qualified. I know that several of the members of that office have been qualified in CP3P certification, and they have, with the help of CLDP, they are obtaining the proper training all the time. So, again, congratulations, you are doing very well on that. The next thing is project design. So if you have a pipeline, how are you going to prioritize that pipeline? And I see that IBN has a pipeline of projects, and it's some projects. I would call it at this stage a wish list, because for it to actually become a pipeline, I think, and I know that IBN is aware of this, it is going to reduce it to maybe not more than 30 projects to become a real pipeline. Because in a pipeline of projects, you need to have studied the project, you have evaluated, you have looked at legal aspects and at implementation aspects and at financial aspects. So once you have these projects, and I know that IBN is advanced in that regard, the question becomes one of making sure that the Ministry of Finance is comfortable with that pipeline. Because it is very important. The Ministry of Finance eventually has to be able to provide support. Investors are going to look for support. And whether a certain project goes on balance sheet or off balance sheet is going to be also an important factor. Investors have their priorities. Investors are not going to spend much time on a country unless it has a pipeline, and a clear pipeline, because they have so many countries. I mean, put yourself in the shoes of a company. A company has a person responsible for business development. This person is going to look after, let's say they give them the responsibility for Asia. Well, they have many countries in Asia, and they have limited resources. They cannot fly everywhere. They cannot study every country. They have, indeed, countries are competing for investor money. And so Nepal needs to be in a position that it can compete and therefore present the investors not with one project, but with a pipeline of projects. The investor says, if I don't win this project, there's another one coming down the line, and maybe I get the second one. And in that sense, Nepal is doing great, because you have the hydropower project pipeline, and you have several projects. So you are a very attractive country for investors in hydropower. Question then becomes, how do you make that investment in hydropower benefit the economy as a whole and not just the budget of the government? And I will come back to that. Perhaps if there's more time, I will discuss that. There are two things more I would say, and I'm sorry, Grishma, if I'm talking for too long. One is stakeholder support, public support. Public is always wary of public-private partnership. Many consider it to be privatization light. And many people are against privatization, and they feel that PPP is a little bit like privatization, and you're giving away the assets of the country to some rich people. And this is not true, because in privatization, you are selling assets. In public-private partnership, you are building new assets that didn't exist before. You are creating new jobs that did not exist before. And that's the importance of PPP. But the public needs to be made aware of that. There needs to be a communication campaign, and this is not just once. This has to be repeated on a regular basis for the public to understand that PPP is a valid thing and they buy into it. And finally, politicians. Politicians are the most difficult. Why do I say that? Because it is look, I said how difficult it is to be a public, to previous experience, absolutely. Oh, you do? Okay. I can imagine. I said how difficult it is to be a PPP staff member in a PPP unit, because you have to know all these things. And you get CP3P certified. And to get CP3P certified, maybe you need to study for like 4 or 5 months. Well, the minister doesn't have time to study for 4 or 5 months to become a PPP specialist. And the prime minister has even less time. The deputy prime minister has no time. So, you need to be able to tell you need to be able to sort of work with the politicians on the important aspects of PPP. Normally what happens in countries is they say, I want you to build an airport on PPP basis. And the PPP unit says, yes, Mr. Prime Minister. And after 6 months, the Prime Minister says, where's the airport? They say, oh, but we're still producing the tender document. What? You are producing the tender document? I've given you 6 months. You haven't built the airport yet. Get out of here. And they change them. And people resign or they get changed. And this is yet another problem to be wary about, is the change of staff, is lack of continuity. PPP is about infrastructure, is about long-term planning, and therefore there needs to be continuity throughout. I will stop here. I'm sorry I talked too much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hayek. So my next question is to Mr. Thakur. I want to build off something that Mr. Hayek just said. As a representative of the World Association of Investment Promotion Agencies, with extensive experience in attracting investors to infrastructure development and services, what are the key factors that drive private sector investment in emerging economies like Nepal?
Thank you. Let me make 5 specific points here. The first point actually comes from the presentation that we just saw. Nepal has been amazingly successful in hydro. It's very clear that this story needs to repeat over other sectors. We really need to have this comparative advantage so that, investors can feel very good about it. Sectors could be like tourism or connectivity related to tourism, skilling, more specifically within hospitality, aviation, healthcare. How do you go about and do that? Quick couple of points. One, let's learn from hydro on a short term. What all did we do well there? Number 2, and this is very interesting because I just saw this a short while ago, IBN has come out with a strategy maybe a couple of years ago, and that really brings out a nice framework. So that would be my first point, actually bringing out the competitive advantages in a few other sectors. The second point, and again, it's a no-brainer, private companies are there to generate revenue. They're really for stable, predictable, and satisfactory returns on investments. So it's clearly the financial returns, but now, more interestingly, it's also the socio-economic impact. If some of you guys were there for the case studies yesterday, nobody talked about how much money we made, but everybody was talking about the jobs created, the new roads which were laid out, the economic progress which people were making. So that would be my second point, which is basically the economic returns. The third point, and I think it's been talked about enough, which is the stable regulatory environment. So the one thing, and this is directly, I've dealt with a lot of investors in different sort of roles, but the one thing which they really hate is inconsistency of policy. Now, this, in the case of infrastructure, becomes even more important because all of these projects will take a really long time to really come up. So that's again something very important. I think the PPP policy framework, the ordinance, and all of these things are great steps in that direction. They will give investor that confidence that all the right things are being done. Sectoral policy and sectoral reforms are equally important, and for that, it's also important to really have regular engagements with investors, hear from them, bring out the things that they want. On a long term, that's only going to help you, more and more. My fourth point is going to be, again, we've talked a lot around risks. Not go into it, but I'll give two quick examples. One, again, we have, sir sitting here next to me. He's an expert from India. But in India, when you looked at the road projects, there was the hybrid annuity model or HAM model which was introduced. So what was the thought behind it? The thought was, can we give singular risks to each entity instead of giving lots of risks to a single. Now in this case, what you'll see happens is that the construction risks actually goes to the developer, and the traffic risk will go to the fund which is putting in the money into it. So it just makes a little risk averse. Second example is, I had been a part of an institutional mechanism for resolution of issues in large infra projects, essentially the PMG mechanism in India. Now, when we've analyzed projects and the issues which come up, the three key things which came out. One was the forest, wildlife, and environmental clearance. Second was land acquisition. Third was right-of-way issues. Now, learning from these things, now what is being done, if you have to do a new road or a rail project, you actually are doing almost 70% of land acquisition before you actually, bring that project out. Now that's really hastening and making the projects much faster. So that's another thing. The last point is going to be, the whole facilitation and hand-holding. What do you need here? You need, the consolidated investable projects. And, as you see in the summit, the whole focus is on projects. The second is on hand-holding the investors through the investment life cycle. So you essentially need the PPP piece, and need the investment promotion agency piece. And that's a factor which I would say Nepal is very, very strong. I work with investment agencies of more than 100 countries. In most of those cases, maybe in US you might have economic development organizations, but in most countries it is an IPA which then takes on a PPP function. In the case of Nepal, it is a PPP entity which is additionally getting the investment functions, but becoming a very holistic sort of a thing. So I would again say that, it's a great future. I can really see a lot of, more money coming in, and congratulations to government of Nepal for organizing this amazing summit. I'll just stop here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thakur. So building off of something that Mr. Thakur said to Ms. Bisbee, during the summit, and as Mr. Thakur just mentioned, we've heard of Nepal's great success in the hydropower sector and hydropower PPPs. So how does Nepal's success in the hydropower sector indicate its readiness to implement large-scale infrastructure projects in other sectors? How can Nepal leverage its success in the hydropower sector to complete projects in other areas?
All right, thank you, Grishma, and thank you for having me here. It's really nice to be here in Nepal and meeting you all. So I think there are a lot of good points made by the other panelists, and I don't want to repeat them, and completely agree with all the points. And I think the first thing we all need to really say and admit to ourselves is Nepal has been doing hydroelectric projects since early 1900s. And that we have to say that Nepal has a capacity and has the expertise, and not only for itself, but also to really share with other countries. And recognize that expertise, that Nepal has been able to do such large-scale hydroelectric projects. And if we start from that point of strength and say, okay, what have we done well? What can we learn from that? What can be applied to other projects? How can we build a similar program? And at the same time, recognize that building a successful large-scale infrastructure program takes time. It's not going to happen immediately. It will take time, and you have to build legal framework, institutional capacity, stakeholders, market, and political commitment to think long-term. And it's really important to admit and really say to yourself that Nepal has done it. We can share this. We have overcome a lot of difficulties and challenges, and we are at this point where we have successfully engaged other countries in exporting energy power. I think the second point which I want to emphasize is it's okay to start with the energy sector. Most of the PPP programs, and I think I want to emphasize that we're talking about PPPs, we're talking about public investments, where the government is seeking private sector to come and co-finance and operate and maintain. So we're talking about public projects here, not private projects. It's okay to start with the energy sector. In all developing countries, if you see how the PPP programs have developed, they have started their programs in the energy sector. It takes countries significant amount of time to really learn from the energy sector because it's just easier. There is one off-taker, there is one power purchase agreement, and then it's easier to implement that in terms of regulation, in terms of transmission. And then progressively, the second major sector which we see is transport. And yesterday and today we've heard that there are a lot of projects which the government is thinking in the transport sector, but build it as a program. Don't build it as one-off project here and there. Just like the energy sector, where the market signal is there that the government is going to be developing the transport sector over the course of next 10 years. So market can really establish itself, the contractors can build, the financiers are ready, and then eventually the country needs to move on from the DFI-based financing to market-based financing. And that market signaling is extremely important. Projects don't really bring transformation, programs do. And that program development has to be really done as part of public investment management planning. And public investment management planning really needs to think in terms of what is really needed for the country development, what projects are appropriate for public financing, what projects can be viable enough to attract private sector. So systematic way of developing a sector, I mean, that has to be a really conscious decision. So team has to be built, capacity has to be built, regulation has to be done. So the third point which I want to emphasize is PPP legal framework, PPP capacity in IBN is only part of it. If transport sector, again, I'm just giving an example, if transport sector and Transport Ministry wants to build a full PPP program, then Transport Ministry has to build this capacity because they are the procuring authority. They have to recognize that PPP is going to be one of the modes with which they're going to attract private sector in public investments, in public transport projects. So they have to understand how private sector works, how they need to do contracting, whether they have the regulation to adjust the tariffs for toll roads or for tunneling, whether they can be signatory on a lot of these projects, whether they are at the national level, whether they are at the provincial level, at the city level. So the transport team has to be ready, market ready, and give that signal that, yes, come and talk to us. So think of all these sectors as a program, not as projects. So I think I will stop here and I will add more progressively.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bisbee. Just before my next question, just wanted to note that we have about a little bit more than 15 minutes left for the remainder of the entire session. So I ask that everyone's second round of answers be quite brief, if possible. So to Mr. CEO Patta, we've discussed this a little bit already, but could you please describe some of the recent work of the Office of the Investment Board of Nepal to prepare the country for large-scale infrastructure projects, maybe focusing a little bit more on capacity of staff?
Well, in regard to some of the work that Office of the Investment Board has done is, we are totally guided by PPPIA Act, and it was very important for us to have a strategic plan backed by business plan. So we do have this plan document and sort of detailed action plan framework is available, and which has actually generated a lot of business for us. And the 4 verticals or pillars of strategic plan is project development and management, investment promotion, institution development, coordination, collaboration, and partnership. So these 4 pillars has been very instrumental for giving us a guideline how we operate our business within the office, and it has ensured office to operate in result-based framework. And so our projects which are under our purview are in different stages of development. Some on construction regime, around $4 billion US, where probability of realization of these projects are very important, and very important in the sense before stipulated timelines. And at the same time, these projects are being de-risked also, because we have been facing problems there, but those problems have solution. And we have been coordinating very closely with our relevant partner line agency, and we've been getting good support, but now we'd have to expedite more on issues relating to land acquisition, or be it issue relating to peace and security, or be it issue relating to management of explosive, because we do require those, and those are complex. And I've been also reporting in regular to Honorable Deputy Prime Minister, who's Minister of Ministry of Home Affairs. So we have been reporting and getting good support because IBN does believe in enhancing its credibility and at the same time boosting morale and confidence of our valued investor. Now coming to capacity, I am very thankful to CLDP, World Bank for helping us prepare project bank guideline, because we have mainstreamed very beautiful tools like project screening analytical tools, value for money analysis framework, and project lifecycle cost analysis framework. But we would be needing more capacity for our real practitioners within our office ecosystem, and not just there, but we'd have to sensitize and give needful required orientation to our staffers from other government line agencies as well. So this is very important. Now coming back to the project development production pipeline that we have started, is totally based on the merit and the standard that we have developed. That is PPP project pipeline. We do identification, screening using those tools which I mentioned earlier, and we select those projects, do ranking and do prioritization. So those projects which are showcased for expression of interest, with call for expression of interest, are projects which were selected following that guideline. And at the same time, there is a lot more to do in capacity development. But what we have said with the respected legal secretary was just mentioned, now the Office of the Investment Board would be able to hire investment cadre. So we will make sure when we train our people, they are retained. So, and they are capacitated to the extent that they can absorb knowledge, utilize knowledge, and the knowledge is preserved also within the institution. So with the knowledge that we have, with the success of good works we have done in hydropower regime, will be utilized on other sectors also. But it is very important for us to have, let's say, sort of a master plan approach. If we want mass transport solution, be it clean transport or railways or EBRT, it is important first we have to have valley integrated transport master plan, which can help us prioritize which section are we going to start first. Not that we will go start with all the sections. So these have been well communicated to our apex planning body. So I'm sure there will be more effective coordination in days ahead, and we'll be able to take forward projects from transport sector also. On road, yes, we are well aware of this success model like HAM, and on that, Department of Road is doing good work, and we would see that in near future, maybe in another 3 months, we may have road shows, or as I said earlier, maybe some shows may be required for us to demonstrate our good works also. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. That is all really, really wonderful to hear, as we know that enabling IBN and the staff there is critical to, and taking ownership and accountability over the process is absolutely critical to attracting investors and for the successful implementation of PPP projects. So with that, my next question is to Mr. Hayek. It is generally easier to attract investors to commercial projects like express highways and hydropower through PPPs than to social projects like education and health. How can governments increase the bankability of social sector projects to meet national targets?
Thank you. I will answer this, but I'll be very quick to add to what Jyoti was saying about the hydropower, because I think it's very important. Selling hydropower by itself is good, but it's like selling a commodity. Nepal can add value to that hydropower before selling it. And therefore, what I see is Nepal being the data center of the subcontinent. Nepal can invest in data centers. Sam Altman of OpenAI, which is the company behind ChatGPT, has said that compute is going to be the currency of the future. It's not Bitcoin, it's not US dollars, it's compute capacity. And Nepal is ideally placed to be a world player in compute capacity. So I really encourage the government to think about this. And there are other ancillary issues like all industries that have high usage of electricity. Thank you. But to answer your question specifically, I really think that the way to attract investment is in Nepal is not by doing large projects only. It's good to do large projects, but you have a pipeline of 120 projects and you do 5 projects a year. It's going to take you 24 years to do these projects. This is not development like it should be. You need to do small-scale PPP projects at the municipal level, at the regional level, not only in Kathmandu and Pokhara, and you need to do it in small towns across Nepal. And the way to do this is to transform the work of the PPP unit from working on projects to working on programs. And if you work on programs, then you can replicate these projects and use standard documentation. And there's a lot more that I would like to say, but I know you're constrained with time.
Thank you very much, Ziad. So to Secretary Gautam, the public-private partnerships are fundamentally a network of contracts between parties. Private entities enter into agreements with the government for projects after carefully assessing risks and potential rewards. What challenges does the government face in developing PPP projects in Nepal, particularly in adhering to the terms and conditions of project development agreements between private parties and the government?
Thank you very much. Different laws in Nepal have provided formidable protection for investment, either within domestic or foreign. But of course, there are challenges. Most of these legal provisions have been well reflected in the project development agreements, which is a very comprehensive document, well negotiated with the relevant parties, which afford, I think, full protection to the investment. But again, there are certain challenges. Some procedural delays are there, some regulatory approvals and other things take time. And to some extent, there are problems in understanding what actually the matter is all about. So, my observation is that we are learning by doing, and I think in the days to come, definitely we will be an attractive destination and provide full protection as invited at par with international level. So towards these directions, some recent amendments have been made in this ordinance also, which again affords protection to the investment and overcome the challenges and difficulties. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Gautam. So the next question is to Ms. Bisbee. We have heard about the Sustainable Development Goals and the urgency. How have PPPs been used as a tool in other countries to reach Sustainable Development Goals?
All right, Grishma, thank you for this question. And I personally feel this is really the most important question. Why do you want to do a project? Why this investment is needed? Why you should come and invest here? That why is the most important question to the citizens of any country. And that why determines the target, the key performance indicator, the payments which are made to the private concessionaire, the structure of the project, the duration of the project, the risk sharing of the project, everything is based on that why. And as part of the Sustainable Development Goals, if you haven't seen the Sustainable Development Goal, SDGs, I encourage all of you to go to the website. They're very simply written, and each goal has many targets. So why do you want to do a project? Because we want kids to be able to go safely to schools. That's why we need the street lighting project. Why do you want to do the project? Because we want to reduce the infant mortality rate. That's why we need this health clinic here. We want to increase the level of education in this particular town. That's why we need this high school, this secondary school. Why do you want to do this project? Because we want to reduce the commuting time so people can go to work and then contribute towards the economic development of the country. That's why we need the metro project. We want to reduce the pollution. Nepal has nationally determined contributions, which is to reduce greenhouse gases, for example. That's a target for Nepal. And those targets have to really transcend into the projects, the design of the project, and that has to transcend to the contract and the risk-sharing arrangement, the private sector. So SDGs are extremely important because it goes to the fundamental need of that particular project. So I encourage, really going back to my first point of a public investment management, that public investment management right from the beginning should include SDGs as to determine what kind of targets does the country want to have in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term.
Thank you very much. So along those same lines, to Mr. Thakur, the sustainable finance market remains an important source of capital for investment in sustainable development goals. What are some pools that Nepal can tap into?
Hello. Yeah. So we have 2,436 days till the SDG 2030 and the Paris Agreement NDC deadlines. So that's the very first point. And the sustainable finance market is now evolving very quickly. So these next 2,500 days are very interesting for us. I'll very quickly touch up on 7 buckets of money, which can come in here very practically. First, the MDB investments. So if we are observing the way the multilateral development banks, World Bank, ADB, all of these guys are going, there's a whole lot of recalibration which is ongoing at the moment. And all of them are very heavily invested into Nepal. So Nepal, I'm very clear, is going to be a huge beneficiary out of all this recalibration reforms which are going on. This collaboration between World Bank and ADB for hydropower is again a very good case in point. The second bucket I like to talk about again is DFIs, the development financial institutions. I believe a week ago there were 14 DFIs which came together and spent 3 days in Nepal, and this number of around 1.1 billion has been invested in the last 9 years or 10 years in Nepal. Very clearly, this can go from 1.1 billion to around 3 billion in the next 5 years. So that's the second very critical bucket. A third is the bilateral aid agencies. I'll not go into this, but we've been hearing about this through the conference. The likes of USAID, FDCO, and so many of them are very much there. The fourth bucket is the climate funds and sustainability themed funds. So when you really look at, again, sustainability themed funds, you'll see some of them are there which will invest into companies. But some of them are there which will invest into projects. Now, the ones which invest into projects, you'll see some of them are also investing into the developing world and more specifically into LDC countries. So quite a few of them, like, GCF, Green Climate Fund, Global Environment Facility, Adaptation Fund, all of these. But the rate at which newer such funds are getting created is phenomenal. And this is something which you'll see really increasingly happen. I can clearly see Nepal becoming one of the big beneficiaries out of it. The fifth bucket, again, voluntary carbon markets. If you were to listen to Mr. Ajay Banga, how, the president of the World Bank, how he's looking at scaling up of the global carbon markets. Nepal, again, has got good experience in community forestry, micro hydro. Again, this is going to be a clear, good area where a lot is going to happen. The last one, again, is, and this is something which I was not planning to include, but today, listening to the way conversations are going on, green bonds. It was great to hear that the first international green bond is going to be done by Dalma, and this is going to actually help in opening up capital markets for Nepal. So that's one. And the big thing out there, which is the institutional investors, the pension funds, the sovereign wealth funds. Infrastructure is a growing, asset class for the large, the financial investors. But they're very, very difficult to, tap any sort of money from. But for Nepal, specific for hydro, as blended, I'm sure you guys will be able to really tap into them. And even if they, you're able to get 1 or 2 projects out of it, you can be rest assured the quantum of money these guys hold on to, your SDG goals may not look so difficult. I'll just stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thakur. Very helpful. So speaking of financing, I'd like to turn to Dr. Bana. So for any PPP investment, it's important to assure investors that their investment is going to be protected, obviously. One of the best ways to do that may be through sovereign... sorry, what am I trying to say? So could you please talk a little bit about that and how they've been handled in other countries?
Okay. I will quickly touch upon that. Firstly, why do we need guarantee? Because like in our day-to-day dealings, when we undertake certain things, when we put our money, we want the expected return. And in this case, in case of infrastructure projects, It's not happening tomorrow, as my fellow panelists have said. These are long-term contracts going 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. So an investor, particularly when the money is coming from outside a country, they look at assurances in terms of their money, providing them the return of investment which is expected, and also protections. Now, there are two types of risks which primarily appear similar, that is country risk and the sovereign risk. The country risk is nothing but the payment history, how a country has been paying. And how is their economy and finances going on. Whereas S&P defines sovereign risks as their capacity to pay and the willingness to pay, right? So accordingly the ratings are there. And in this part of the world, many of the international creditors, and as ADB says, the risk profile is not so investor friendly. So what is to be done in that case? The investors, not only the external investors, but domestic investors also seek guarantees. And those guarantees could be the sovereign guarantee in form of state support. That is first option. That is, as the project is offered, the government assists and takes part in land acquisition, in taking over part of the transaction in terms of traffic or other risks, in terms of risks repayment, that is availability based or minimum traffic assurance. So those are the kind of things where the government, when they take part, and also assuring that assets will not be nationalized or whatever till the time the debts are not completed, and all those policy processes are there. Then there may be a situation that the government, no matter what guarantees they give, they are not in a situation to assure because their ratings themselves, sovereign ratings, are less. In those cases, multilateral development banks come in. They can come in and they can add to the credibility of the government and sign a multilateral contract. Whereas the state government, that is the national government, and multilateral development bank like World Bank, ADB, AIB, or MIGA, MIGA, they can be a party to that agreement, and the department or the corporation, the grantor of the project, and the project promoters. Together, this combination can be a worthwhile combination to have, ensuring that yes, the financial close can take place, the money can come in, and debtors and lenders can be assured that yes, the money will be returned and the profits, whatever is expected, can also be earned. So the sovereign guarantees are nothing but assurance to not only to investors but also to public that yes, when the asset is created, it will also perform to its life, and the economic activity which is expected will happen. That's all.
Thank you very much. So the last question I will turn over to CEO Patta. So, during this summit, we've had the government has issued lots of expressions of interest from various projects and sectors such as energy, transportation, drinking water, and tourism, which has generated considerable excitement. So I'd just like to give you the final word on how IBN plans to advance under the PPP model these projects, and how is IBN facilitating the process as well.
And thank you for the question. They're almost like a 20-plus project for which expression of interest has been called. So we say it showcasing for call of expression of interest. So we are awaiting and we're giving them a reasonable time as prescribed by our Act and rules. And the procedures are well vividly mentioned in the regulation. So we have to abide and follow what is already prescribed there. Once within 45 days, those interest from potential capable proponents or prospective developer companies are lodged, we will go through evaluation. We'll most likely, at this juncture, look into the financial and technical capability of the proponent. And we will shortlist those companies. But meanwhile, it has added a lot of work to us. And with all relevant line agency, like for sanitation, relevant line agency, with be it a case of road, with Ministry of Physical Planning and Transport, for energy, which are below 200 megawatt, those hydropower projects with Department of Electricity Development through its line agency. We will work in coordinated and very integrated approach, and we will ensure that we move ahead following fundamental and principle. So that will itself maybe require more level of experts, because we may have to work out on risk aspect and ensure that, we prepare a good RFP. So all work that has to be done so as we are able to structure a project properly, and not just to the level of, drafting a quality RFP, but also drafting and structuring the PDAs for those projects. So project under the jurisdiction or mandate of IBN are just 12 in numbers. On that, we'll be guided by our Act and rules. And for others, there are relevant Act and rules that each development-related line agency or subsequent their implementing agency already have. And with that retrospect, we would move ahead with this. And I would want to say there were few projects for market sounding. So we were wanting to have, feedback of our quality and audience. We were seeking feedback on that also. So most likely, once we have database, we'll communicate each one of you and try to seek your good, noble suggestion, which we can incorporate and make sure, project is attractive. And at the same time, as Banaji has said, we will reach out to MDPs for their support also, how we can incentivize those projects where climate actions are there. And at the same time, how we can de-risk project. And also, maybe we have been talking about VGF, but there are things like VGL, viability gap lending sort of an arrangement, or we see how our genuine private investor have an access to global financing institution for concessional loan. So that's why earlier I was mentioning greed. I think we are awaiting to have strategic action plan, and which will generate business for private window. And I only want to limit myself talking about private sector and at the same time private expenditure framework. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, CEO Wata, and thank you to all of the panelists for your very insightful answers to the questions. At this time, I'd like to turn it back over to our MC, Ms. Shovana.
Thank you so much. It's been a sheer delight to see, and we couldn't have ended all the intensive deliberations any better. And this intense and enriching session pretty much sort of sums up the things that applies to almost all the sectoral discussions we have had in course of the summit under this umbrella, ladies and gentlemen. So much grateful we are for the expert perspectives, thoughts, and the recommendations. And special thank you for being so candid in sharing your knowledge and perspectives. Now to endorse all these expert views and perspectives that you've just shared, it's our turn now to turn to our session chair to make his statement. May I invite the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister and Home Minister to kindly make his statement.
Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I think I have gained a reputation of being straightforward, and I get a lot of comments and charges on that, especially not being so diplomatic. I think this time I'll keep it, and then I would like to be very straightforward on a lot of, questions and queries that has been raised in this forum. So I just want to make sure a few things here, that the government of Nepal is very much committed and promised. One example is right in front of us, which is just passed ordinance is there. So we understand the problems that you've been facing, and I'm well aware of the experiences that all the investors having, not only the experience and impression as well. We're well aware of the impression and the experience that you all have. So I think this time we are very much committed on many things. Especially, we know about the complex of especially the land acquisition, especially buying, leasing lands and all. So not only that, the issues of security, we are well aware of that, and then we will make sure that we are well aware of the situation. And then again, I would like to, show my commitment that we will be taking care of the things in a historic way. This is our commitment from the Ministry of Home Affairs. And we are well aware of, having a lot of unlawful activities from various groups, including political parties as well. So we are well aware of that also. Under my leadership in the Ministry of Home, I just want to make a clear statement here that we are not only the security agency, we are a law enforcement agency as well. So just want to make a note on this. As we conclude this two-day Nepal Investment Summit, I am highly encouraged by the insights and enthusiasm that marked every session. We have seen a convergence of informed mind and innovative ideas that promise to shape the investment landscape here in Nepal. From comprehensive keynotes to vibrant panel discussions, we have explored trends, exchanged experiences, and forged connections, or constructed the connections. Let's carry this spirit of collaboration forward, leveraging our collective experience, expertise, and resources to drive growth, create jobs, and innovate for the larger social goods. Regarding this session, leveraging the PPP for infrastructures and services, let me make three major points to complement this rich discussion which I've heard so far. First, conceptually, capital formation through infrastructure is an important source of economic growth and essential for development takeoff for countries like ours with low levels of development. Roads, electricity, and the telecom are not just key inputs to production, but they also have large social externalities. Secondly, the financial deficit is huge in infrastructure. There is an estimate of McKinsey of funding gap of $15 trillion between global infrastructure needs and spending through 2030, particularly in developing countries. Because public finance is insufficient, we must attract private capital and leverage public-private partnership in urban areas. Financing of infrastructure has to be embedded in an institutional web of good governance. Projects must be vetted, processes must be transparent, and outputs must be subject to public screening or public audit. And thirdly, the scope of nature of infrastructure now needs to build in sustainability as well as resilience. We need to go for green infrastructure, avoid the mistakes of the past, and use the latest know-how. We can save a lot by just scaling best practices, selecting projects, optimizing portfolio, and streamlining delivery. Instead of just building new things, let us also think about how we can get more use out of existing infrastructure by reducing losses, maintaining better, and managing demand smartly. On behalf of the government of Nepal, let me thank all speakers, partners, volunteers, and participants, especially our foreign delegates who travel far and wide to be with us this week. I'm hopeful that many of you will consider investing in Nepal. May the connections made here take us closer towards a safer and more secure future of shared prosperity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Prime Minister, most importantly for gracing us at this very, very important juncture of this summit, and a special expression of gratitude for the emphasis that you laid on shared prosperity. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are now approaching the very, very concluding moments of this penultimate engagement of the activities under the summit's umbrella. However, we are very, very much looking confidently forward towards heightened engagements that would foster collaborations and partnerships amongst many, many partners, old, new, and emerging ones who are represented in this hall. It's with a lot of delight and gratitude that we extend this audience, this distinguished audience, a note of gratitude. Thank you so much for turning up. So as we come to the closing moments of this penultimate panel, allow me to share a few concluding notes. As I already said, this panel is coming from some intensive deliberations and reflections that held in course of 12 panels that were held under this umbrella on the second day of the summit today. We also had 2 important plenaries and many, many side events and high-level engagements in the sidelines. So, as I said earlier, and I reiterate again, most of the expert recommendations and the reflections that came from this forum is applying and is again a reflection of all the suggestions and the aspirations shared in majority of the sessions. The emphasis laid by our distinguished panelists, namely on strengthening capabilities, setting priorities, strategizing policy plan and programs, setting up apparatuses accordingly, emphasis on systematizing development approach, and above all, political commitment surely has been, we believe, noted by the concerned side, and the Deputy Prime Minister himself has already endorsed on this. Thank you so much one more time to the distinguished members in the panel for your invaluable and candid inputs, which certainly is going to be very, very pivotal in the days that we foster collaborations ahead, and is also adding a lot more impetus to our efforts and enthusiasm. Said this to extend our gratitude for leading this panel, and to the panelists, may I invite the Chief Secretary of the Government of Nepal, Dr. Baikunta Aryal, up on stage, please. This is first and foremost presenting a token of appreciation for the valuable time, the guidance, supervision, and the solidarity extended by the session chair, the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister and Home Minister, Mr. Ravi Lamichhane. Thank you to the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister, and thank you to the Chief Secretary as well. Now I turn to the Session Chair, the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister, to present the token of appreciation to our esteemed members in the panel, beginning with the presenter in the panel, Mr. Mark Giblett, who's a Senior Infrastructure Finance Specialist. This is coming with a deep felt sense of gratitude, sir, for the tone and the ambience that you added to this deliberation here. To the session moderator, Ms. Grishma Pradhan, Attorney Advisor, CLDP USA. We couldn't have run it any better without your efficient, effective, and experienced moderation. To Mr. Sushil Bhatta, the CEO of the Investment Board of Nepal, for his invaluable contribution to this panel and for the great leadership he has demonstrated in spearheading PPP and the entire execution of IBN. Thank you so much, sir. My pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, of inviting Mr. Phanindra Gautam, the Secretary at the Ministry of Law, Justice and Parliamentary Affairs of the Government of Nepal, for his invaluable time and the invaluable contribution that he lent to this very important panel. To Mr. Ziad Alexander Hayek, President, World Association of PPP Units and Professionals, Geneva, Switzerland, for the great value that you added to this panel by your very valuable presence and sharing. Mr. Dushyant Thakur, Deputy Executive Director, World Association of Investment Promotion Agencies. We are incredibly grateful for the great experience, expertise, and knowledge you bring along. To Dr. Naresh Bana, Chairperson of South Asia Chapter, WAP, and expert in PPP of the Government of India. And to Ms. Jyoti Bisbay, Executive Committee Member and Head of Partnerships, WAP. It was a great value added. Your inputs, your insights certainly were noted with high regard, ma'am. Thank you so much. And with this, may I request the panelists to kindly take center stage for a quick photo opportunity with the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you one more time to the distinguished panel. Thank you so, so much. And I turn to the members in the audience. Thank you so much for your for all the support, the great gestures, the spirit, enthusiasm, and vigor that you bring along. Trust us, that is the basis of the drive that we get to steer everything around as we look forward to heightened collaboration and cooperation in the days ahead, because the goal is about shared prosperity again. So that, ladies and gentlemen, this is connecting, this session is connecting to the closing ceremony, which will be graced by the former Prime Minister of Nepal, Honorable KP Sharma Oli, who will be joining us in about a few minutes. In the meantime, let me request all of you, if you are using the headsets or earpieces that have been availed for the interpretation services, kindly deposit it back at its respective station before you leave. So we are, ladies and gentlemen, moments away from the closing ceremony. As we get the stage set, we request you to kindly bear with us for a few more minutes. We shall begin the formalities upon the arrival of the Honorable Chief Guest, who is almost here and will be joining us in a matter of a few minutes. The closing ceremony would not take long. It's just a small ceremony when we will be apprising you with the outcomes of the Nepal Investment Summit. I'm sure you all are looking forward keenly towards that.
Nepal, the birthplace of Lord Buddha and the land of Mount Everest, is a country endowed with abundance of investment opportunities. Nestled between two fastest growing economies of the world, India and China, it offers an unrivaled potential for trade. With aspirations to become a middle-income country by 2030, Nepal has opened its doors wide to private investments, including foreign direct investment. Dive into the vast potential of Nepal's investment landscape spanning across multiple sectors. In energy, an abundance potentiality in hydro, wind, solar and biomass remains untapped. With spectacular scenery, rich heritage, diverse climate and warm hospitality, the investment avenues in tourism sector include hotel, adventure, sports, spirituality and MICE. On infrastructure, investors can explore their opportunities in cable car,